we have learned so far in the public meetings, the other technical meetings, and some of the individual and group interviews we've conducted. And then finally, we're focusing the technical aspect of our meeting today on the types of support that is available to participate in PURA proceedings that will specifically focus on the stakeholder compensation program and the funds that are available to support folks to engage at PURA. So this is our agenda for the day. Next, please. Want to just note that we have several of the members of the consulting team that has been working with PURA on this docket, from Common Spark Consulting, Elevated Engagement, and Dunsky. We bring this variety of experiences to this process, and again are really honored to be part of this work with PURA, that we have combined significant experience both with regulatory proceedings like those that the PURA conducts, and how commission processes work. We have worked extensively also in both stakeholder engagement and equitable engagement. So working with community organizations as well as folks like PURA to help bridge those gaps and make sure that all communities have what they need and understand how to participate in energy decision making. And also have done a lot on strategic planning and facilitation. So we will be, as I will describe in more detail as we go, but are building a resource for PURA to use as they move forward in order to bring more voices into their decision-making spaces. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to dig a little bit into PURA, and just note that we do have several members of both the staff as well as the chair and Commissioner Carrion of PURA here with us today, so listening in on your feedback. But we'll start with the who is PURA. So PURA is the entity that is responsible for overseeing the work of the investor-owned utilities in the state of Connecticut. And they are tasked with providing, as you see there, safe, clean, reliable, and affordable utility services and infrastructure. And they have four main services that are underneath their jurisdiction. So it's electric service, natural or fossil gas, water, and telecommunications. Next slide. So the way that PURA works is that the legislature sets the law, and I should add, PURA is established in law, in legislation that really lays out their authority and the requirements of how they conduct that authority. So they are given statutory requirements and responsibility, and then PURA is responsible for interpreting that and applying it to the services that are provided in Connecticut. So that often looks like things like setting utility rates is a big one that folks are likely aware of, but also just keeping the infrastructure up to date for those different services, determining which suppliers can sell electricity in the state or not, and then providing education and outreach. So helping folks in the state really just understand the utility processes and what's happening related to developments on energy policy in the state. Next slide, please. So PURA has done something very unique with the EASE docket, again, that stands for Equity, Accessibility, and Stakeholder Engagement, in opening up a proceeding to really look at how they can bring more and more diverse voices into the spaces where decisions are made about those utility services that we've talked about. So the EASE docket has four defined goals that is, what is the foundation for the charge of the work that the consultant group is supporting. So one is that more meaningful, efficient, and easier stakeholder participation, looking for where those constraints exist and how we can try to address those, getting customers the type of information that they need in order to do that well and to just understand what things are happening that might impact them, and identifying some tools and support that would help with that first one of easing meaningful and more engagement stakeholder participation. So there's a number of ways that as the consultant team, we are approaching meeting those goals. Our first step was a preliminary assessment. So coming in and with that background that our team brings to the table, looking at what Pura's current processes look like, what information is available publicly, trying to just get a good understanding of the landscape and where some of those problems in participating may lie, where some of those obstacles may lie. So we started with that just very basic overview of taking a look at what we could see publicly in the Pura processes. So that's our preliminary assessment. And then the next step in this meeting is actually part of our second step, which is the engaged discovery. So the most critical aspect of this work is getting input from folks both who are participating now and those who may have an interest in participating in the future. So engaged discovery is really doing that listening work to understand what it is that folks need in order to have more meaningful and more diverse participation. So we have conducted the first bullet there of the focus groups are interviews. We have conducted so far 9 either individual or small group interviews with some of the organizations and people that, again, many have participated in proceedings at Pura, others have not. So we've had 9 of those, as well as 2 public meetings that have already taken place where we've documented input from folks like all of you. And then this is the second of our technical meetings where we are covering something that is a little bit more detailed about either the Pura processes or focusing in on things that we have identified that would be valuable to add some more input on. So this is, again, the second of those. And then what we're going to do is take all of that and help build a strategy with Pura on what that future outcome might look like. So that we'll take all of that and consider it with the experience that we all have with other commissions and working with community organizations to help build what does that future look like. So that would be the strategy. And then again, we'll be offering resources or building with Pura resources on what that future external pieces might look like to advance this work. And then Pura will also be receiving training, Pura staff will be receiving training and continuing to do that, more internal within the organization kind of work on increasing their understanding of the energy situation and where some of those barriers can reside. So next slide, please. This is kind of our overall timeline of this work. It will be done by the end of the year this year, and you can see the dates. We had the public meetings were in March and May. The first technical meeting was in April, and then here we are for the second one. And you see the timeline for us building out those different aspects of the overall plan. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to cover, thank you, we'll keep going forward to cover just a little bit of the feedback that we have received so far. So those of you who have not participated can get a little bit of an understanding of the themes that we're hearing in those 9 interviews, 2 public meetings, and 1 technical meeting. And again, this is just to give you all a sense of where those are really looking forward to hearing more from each of you today on these issues or others as we go forward. So one of the big things that has surfaced in those discussions is just how many folks are not even aware that Pura exists, or if they have heard of Pura, aren't familiar with what they do exactly, which services, utility services they have jurisdiction over, or that they have responsibility for, or if they are aware that those things happen, just how it works and how you engage was one of the main things that we've heard from a lot of folks, that it can be very technical, it can be very bureaucratic, and folks are just not familiar with what it would look like to be able to engage effectively with Pura. We heard a lot too. Pura has been doing outreach efforts already, really trying to connect with folks in different communities and share that information about what Pura is and how it works. But we have also received a lot of feedback, a lot of it from some of the folks who are on the call today or in this meeting today, about different ways that Pura can connect with communities, how there are places where communities already are meeting, and ideas like Pura showing up in some of those places to be able to join where people are already congregating together, and to be able to share information there or have conversations with folks, as well as other things like, are there media outlets that we should be using that would be effective to reach different communities? So that's one we're always interested in feedback on, how best to reach your community with information about utility services. Frustration with the process, if folks have participated, and I'll say this is not unique to Pura. Utility regulatory processes are complex everywhere because they are partial judicial processes, sort of partial, kind of have legislative types of work that they do. And so navigating that process and even knowing how to navigate that process is something we've heard a lot about, and something that we are hoping to build some more resources for folks to be able to better engage. The Puro website has come up a lot as a potential barrier, just in there being some challenges in information that is available and where on the website. How intuitive is it to find the things that you're looking for? We've gotten recommendations on things like having the ability to search more easily on the site. So if you are someone who has an interest in, say, energy efficiency programs, things like, can we build a place where you can say energy efficiency is the thing I'm interested in, and find out what's happening at the commission under that topic. So just, I'll say the other piece we've heard a lot about is there's a actual section of the site where all of the docket information is, or where case information is, that operates even a little bit differently than the basic aspects of the site. So we have heard about where there might be desire for improvement in the way that works. So that whole thing about how the website offers information and how folks can interact with that has come up a lot. And then finally, just people wanting to know that their effort matters, and that if they're putting time in to participate and to share their thoughts on different issues, that that will matter and will be taken into consideration. And that if they tell their neighbors and community members to show up, that everyone feels like that time will be well spent because they will be heard and considered. So that again is a very high level. We've heard a lot more detailed information, but just wanted to give that to all of you as an update on where we are today. And I think with that, I am going to, I guess we can maybe just give it a quick second here to see before we move into some of the information about the stakeholder compensation program and ex parte rules, to open up the floor and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts on what we've shared thus far about Pura or about the ease docket. And again, you can raise your hand and we can call on you that way. That is available in your React button on your Zoom menu. Kathy, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Well, I have a number of things, but I think they're better in a different part of the conversation today.
Okay.
But the one that sort of relates directly to the process is, from time to time, I hear from people who have some sort of comment on Pura's processes. And I understand that with the docket, you have, a beginning and a middle and an end. And yet what I hear doesn't necessarily fit into a timeline like that. So I'm wondering if people do have additional comments. I know Pura always welcomes comments from the public, but should they reference this docket, or how should they, if they're out of sync with Pura's timeline, how should they still bring it to your attention?
And Kathy, just to confirm, are you referring to things specific to this docket or thinking more broadly about just dockets in general?
More broadly about dockets and the process, but not comments about specific content of a docket, more about Pura, what is Pura, how does the process work, those kind of things. So it's kind of related to this docket, but this docket may be closed by then.
So if Chair Gillette, I just saw you come off on camera. Would you like to address that?
Sure. Hi, Kathy. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So maybe if I can interpret your question, hopefully I'm interpreting your question correctly. If it's, sometime next year and someone says to you, man, I really wish I knew how to submit a comment into Pura, or wouldn't it be great if they would post an executive summary on their homepage? I'm interpreting your comment to be like, how in the future would someone convey that feedback to us?
Correct.
Okay, so I think part of what we're looking for in this docket is advice on how to create that kind of feedback loop for the future. So I'm not sure I have an exact answer to you, other than to say that that's exactly what we're trying to tackle here. Is like, we have that Pura information at ct.gov email address, which is manned or it's staffed by people in Pura's Office of Education Outreach and Enforcement. So they can always direct comments. We also have our docket control that can kind of help walk people through the process of entering a comment to the record. So those existing channels, or those channels exist today. But I do recognize, I think we all recognize, that maybe formalizing a feedback loop or a more deliberate process is something that we could take up, and would welcome your input through this docket on how we keep those lines of communication open moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for raising that, Kathy. Any other questions or comments? We will have another opportunity toward the end as well. So if other questions come up as we go through our time together today, there will be another opportunity to raise those. All right. Not seeing any, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Lauren McNutt, to take us through the next session.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. And thanks everyone for joining today. I'm going to talk for a little bit longer, but not for that much longer. We really want to spend a lot of time hearing from you folks, but thought it really important to level set and talk a little bit more about some of the rules that apply to gathering and evaluating feedback and input to support decision making, some of the existing supports that are available, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And please feel free as I'm talking to, if there's any clarifying questions, happy to stop and answer those too. So with that, here we go. So again, coming back to a little bit, just some foundational information about Pura. In order to make decisions, Pura opens these formal spaces that we've been referring to as dockets. Sometimes they're called proceedings or cases, and these are meant to discuss specific issues. And I think importantly to note here, Pura can really only make decisions based on the evidence that is provided through that formal docket record. And evidence can be, really that, I guess that docket system, just to sort of expand on that, that's really this virtual filing system essentially that records all the information, all the evidence, all the comments that are filed by individuals, groups, and organizations that participate in that docket and really help to inform Pura's decisions. There are some very specific rules laid out in legislation that commissioners must follow in order to make decisions. And those rules really describe how that information is gathered, how it is evaluated, and who can present different perspectives and information when. Those rules are intended to make sure that commissioners get all the perspectives and information they need to make fair decisions. While these rules are in place to ensure fairness and inclusiveness, sometimes those inadvertently can create complexity, and it can sometimes make it hard for certain people, perspectives to participate. And, again, may inadvertently get in the way of commissioners getting all that information that they need to make an informed decision. There's one rule in particular, the ex parte rule. And ex parte means by or from one party. And ex parte communication really occurs when one party to a proceeding communicates with PURA commissioners or staff without the presence, knowledge, or consent of other parties and interveners in a docket. In Connecticut, ex parte communication is not allowed during proceedings. And really the intent is to avoid any party gaining an advantage by having unfair access to information or providing information to PURA commissioners or staff without another party having an opportunity to respond to that information. And that ex parte rule is really intended to increase transparency, but it is not often well understood. And sometimes the systems that are put in place can create barriers. And they're not intentional, but they sometimes do. Most of PURA staff are subject to the ex parte rule. And this is a very high level organizational chart outlining the different groups that are part of PURA. We have the Office of the Commissioners, which includes the chairman and 2 commissioners. We have the Education Outreach and Enforcement Office, Technical and Regulatory Analysis Office, and Administration and Operations. The Technical and Regulatory Analysis and Administration Operations are sometimes referred to as decisional staff. Only the Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement, or EOE, is the only group that's not subject to ex parte. They can respond to public inquiries, questions, concerns, anytime during a proceeding. But EOE can only communicate with decisional staff through the docket itself, just like any other individual or group. Majority of those in PURA are subject to that ex parte rule. An ex parte rule or communication, is, as I said, not allowed during a contested proceeding or if a matter is expected to become a proceeding. And a contested proceeding, I should probably clarify, it's where a party's legal rights, duties, or privileges are at issue and are required by law. Ex parte rule can be waived in an uncontested proceeding, which an uncontested proceeding is much more broader in nature. Usually the issue is around general policy, open to a broader group. But even in those uncontested proceedings, even though ex parte rule can be waived, it's often applied as a default in case that uncontested proceeding may in the future become a contested proceeding. So really want to try to be careful about who's communicating with who when. Even though that ex parte rule does exist, and ex parte communications are prohibited, all PURA proceedings are open to the public. There is an avenue to communicate and participate in proceedings to ensure that PURA has all the information they need to make decisions. Communication with PURA is permitted, provided it is all on the record through that formal docket process. You can get involved in a number of different ways by becoming a participant or an intervener. You have to apply to do that, filing a public comment, or participating in a public hearing. And we just have a snapshot here of the PURA website. All of this information is available on the website. I know what we heard from Tanya, there's definitely some areas of the website that can be improved, but that information is there currently. And really, it's been recognized that there are certain perspectives and voices that have not been traditionally able to participate in regulatory proceedings. So this stakeholder group compensation program was established first through legislation in June 2023. And it was launched by PURA in January 2024, so a little over a year and a half ago, or around a year and a half ago, through docket number 230934. And the purpose of this program is specifically to help eligible stakeholder groups be able to participate in proceedings. It's really about providing financial support. So there is up to $1.2 million available annually to support eligible stakeholder groups. And that money can be, is sort of capped at up to $100,000 per party per case, or up to $300,000 per case. Groups that are eligible, it's very targeted because this is ratepayer funds, and the intent of this program is to make sure that those who have traditionally not participated, it's very specific, or it's very focused on groups that represent residential customers who live in environmental justice communities or those that experience hardship, as well as groups that represent small business customers. In 2024, after the first year of the program, a little over $33,000 was awarded, and a total of $223,000 were reserved for 5 groups for dockets that were initiated in that year. In the first half of 2025, as of June, we have a little over almost $112,000 reserved for 4 groups. So half of what was reserved in 2024, and almost the same number of groups have participated in the first half of 2025. So we know, in that first year, PURA did not hit that spending cap of $1.2 million. There's a host of factors that might explain that. The fact, I think, that it is a new program, and with any new program, always have to build awareness in the community. And we anticipate that as awareness grows, so too will participation. But I think on that note, with any new program, just because not all spending available, not all funds available were not spent, does not necessarily mean that there is something wrong with the program or that something needs to change. With any new program, you sort of set this threshold. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how many groups may participate, how many groups want to participate, what kind of needs they have and what kind of funding amounts they need and may request. So there may need to be some balancing in terms of understanding what the right amount of funding is available per year and the groups that will be seeking funding and support throughout the year. And that may change year over year. Other factors that could contribute to sort of not spending that full amount in the first year, maybe compensation levels are not sufficient, either per case or per party. Program processes can sometimes be challenging with any new program, and really understanding maybe where those pain points are during that customer journey throughout the program. And in all fairness to Pura, some of these things are outside of their control. There are some very specific program processes that are prescribed in legislation. And not saying that it can't change, but it would be a little bit more difficult or take a little bit more time to change, and not something that Pura has the ability to change quickly. And there could be a whole host of other things that may explain that funding amount not being used in that first year. Proceeding timelines. We know dockets can sometimes take quite a significant amount of time, and stakeholder groups may want to try to understand or may not want to participate and bridge those costs over an extended period of time. There may be some concern around risk or uncertainty. If I don't contribute substantially, will I be able to get that funding at the end? We've heard from other groups that, worried about perceptions, recognizing that this stakeholder group compensation program is funded by ratepayers, and wanting to be careful about how they use those ratepayer funds and how they might be perceived if they do. There may be many other things that we haven't considered. And so for today, we really want to walk you through the stakeholder group compensation program in a little bit more detail. Some of you have participated in this program already, others, this may be new. So we just want to make sure that everybody's sort of familiar with the key concepts and the steps. And then we really want to spend a little time hearing from you, gathering your feedback on your experience for those that participated, and for those who haven't, your opinions and perspectives about potential opportunities to improve the program over time. So the docket process can be sort of boiled down into 5 key steps. There's a lot of things that happen during these steps, but essentially you initiate the docket. Then there's time spent by Pura, participants, interveners, the public, helping to build the record and providing evidence, comments. Pura then issues a draft decision. There are sometimes additional comments and input that may require some changes, and then Pura issues a final decision. During the docket process, there are 6 steps to participate through the stakeholder group compensation program. When that docket is initiated, eligible stakeholder groups must file a notice of intent, then complete and submit an application and a planned itemized budget, sign an agreement. During the next 3 steps, building the record, commenting on the draft decision, there's an expectation that groups contribute substantially. And then after that final decision is made, stakeholder groups submit evidence of their contribution and their actual itemized budget, and then they receive compensation. I talked about this at a pretty high level. I'm going to go through each of these 6 steps in a little bit more detail. So during the notice of intent, eligible stakeholder groups file a notice of intent for both the relevant docket that they're interested in participating in, as well as the stakeholder group compensation program docket. The notice of intent is really important. It's a first step to allow Pura to collect relevant information like groups' contact information, understand their eligibility, the customer groups that they represent, and the nature and extent of their planned participation. Pura automatically grants participation status in the stakeholder group compensation program, and then groups have to apply for participant or intervener status in the relevant docket that they're interested in participating in, and then they would receive notice that they've been granted the ability to participate. All of these forms, the notice of intent and the request for an intervener or participant status, is available on Pura's website. We have links in the slide deck, which will be shared after. During the application and budget step, eligible groups submit their application and the itemized budget within the application window, which is typically around 2 weeks. Eligible costs can include attorney fees, expert witness fees, and other out-of-pocket expenses. All of that has to be supported by documentation. And again, we've just listed here links to the appropriate forms, all available on Pura's website. Recognizing that some of these dockets can take a significant amount of time, there are opportunities for advanced payments available for groups that may experience financial hardship. So these groups, applicants explain their need for those advanced payments and then provide annual budgets of revenue and expenses to demonstrate that how they are experiencing financial hardship. There may be some additional program requirements. These are not necessarily required of all stakeholder groups that are applying to participate in this program, but stakeholder groups that represent similar interests may be required to apply jointly to receive compensation. And the intent here is really to minimize providing compensation for duplicate contributions. This would be done on a case-by-case basis. Some stakeholder groups may be required to attend educational training, and this is really intended to help support effective participation and understanding of PURA, their decisions, the rulings, utility operations, and regulations. And this training may be offered by PURA or potentially others. And then applicants must sign an agreement and file that after they've been confirmed to participate in the relevant docket. And they must, basically the signed agreement, it's a 2-page agreement, providing or committing to provide evidence of substantial contribution at the end, an itemized expense form with supporting documentation, and then returning all or part of any advance payment that they've received if participation is discontinued, and return any unused compensation. In terms of what we mean by contribute substantially, during the proceeding, as PURA is building the record, informing the draft decision, this is about stakeholder groups assisting PURA in its decision-making. And that is by providing a factual or legal contention or policy or procedural recommendation that PURA may adopt. So there's some examples of, there's a broad, there's no real definition of what constitutes substantial contribution, but there's methods of contributing. So that could be issuing and responding to interrogatories, participating in cross-examination, providing written comments, filing briefs, written exceptions, highlighting any deficiencies in compliance or other filings, or providing unique or meaningful facts analysis recommendations, or just additional perspectives in the proceeding that contributes to decision-making. At the end, when the final decision has been made, applicants or participants must submit their evidence of contribution. So they provide evidence by providing a detailed narrative of how they participated in the docket, including any impacts that they had on the proceeding and the outcomes, provide a list of hyperlinks to all the group's docket submissions, a list of times that the groups engaged in the process, and a record of any public outreach or engagement with stakeholders outside of the proceeding that PURA might not be aware of. They provide an itemized record of expenditures, again, all with documentation, and then return any unused compensation. Again, forms, evidence of substantial contribution, stakeholder group compensation, itemized expenditure form, all of that is provided for participants and available on the website. And then compensation. Once all that's filed, compensation is paid at the end of the proceeding, minus, of course, any advance payments. And the public service companies are the ones that actually, public service companies, sorry, I should say, who are involved in a proceeding are the ones who pay the compensation. And it's prescribed in legislation who pays what. So if it's one public service company that's involved in the proceeding, that company pays the entire amount. If there's multiple public service companies from a single sector, electricity, gas, or water, the funding is then apportioned across each company by load, usage, or volume. And then If there's multiple public service companies from more than one sector, each company's funding portion is based on just their total number of customers served. This isn't part of the sort of customer journey through or program participant journey, but the program is required by law to be evaluated by January 2027. So after the first 3 years of the program. An evaluation is required to be conducted by an independent consultant, and the independent consultant will assess performance, impact, and the effectiveness of the program. And ultimately, all of that will be submitted through a final report that includes a summary of the program process, program performance, things like the number of applications received, how many stakeholder groups have participated, how many participated that had financial hardship. There's an assessment of the program costs and the impact it had on stakeholder groups participating, and any recommendations for legislative changes that may need to be made. And this last slide is really just about really highlighting the fact that there are some things, most things are actually prescribed in legislation. And PURA has limited ability to change that quickly. Again, just because it's in law doesn't mean it can't change, but there would be a different process and it takes a little bit more time to do so. So things like defining eligible stakeholder groups, what it means to be a group defined as having a financial hardship. What does it mean to mean by substantial contribution? Those funding limits that we talked about earlier. What's required as part of the application, that requirement that groups of similar interest may have to apply jointly to receive compensation, training may be required, how compensation payment is required across different public service companies participating in a docket, maintaining that itemized record of all costs incurred, and then that compensation process and evaluation. All of that is prescribed in the general statute. In the docket also reiterates some of those things that are prescribed in the legislation, but there are additional details where PURA does have a little bit more, details a little bit more in terms of requiring evidence of substantial contribution following the proceeding, and then some additional details on that compensation payment process. So I'm going to stop there. We do have a guest, Bonnie Roswig, who's going to actually talk about her experience, but maybe before that, I did see a comment or two. Does anyone have any questions about the process? No questions yet? Okay. Well, we've got some guiding questions coming up. We'll open up to discussion in a moment. What we thought, it's one thing for us to talk a little bit about the process and the steps, but we wanted to have Bonnie just take a few minutes to talk about her experience going through this program herself, make it a little bit more tangible. So, Bonnie, maybe I'll hand it over to you if you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I promised everyone that I would be brief, and I will do my best, although it's not always possible. So we are a recipient of the Stakeholder Compensation Program, and it is, as a bottom line and sort of more broadly, not only from my personal experience and experience in my agency I'll talk about, but it is so critical to have diverse voices involved in these proceedings. The group of the current dockets are very narrow in terms of the stakeholders, and for better or for worse, their perspective. And it's not that stakeholders in these proceedings are experienced energy people, but they're not always giving the perspective of more diverse aspects of the community. And this is critical that those diverse perspectives or needs are reflected in the dockets, because decisions are made every day that really affects a broad range of communities. In terms of the dockets that I've been involved with, the most challenged communities in terms of financially, medically, et cetera. And so it is really so critical to have more diverse voices involved, because otherwise needs are met. And we have, what we call in the business unintended consequences. And that is really so true when your organizations like mine that actually represent clients in these proceedings, and you see how some of the decisions and directives that come out of these dockets are impacting clients in a way that perhaps weren't anticipated. And as a very brief example, we have that great low-income discount rate program. It is terrific for clients, but one of the things that we worked very hard with, and that OCC worked very hard, is to get information shared between our Department of Social Services and the companies. And that is done by the client's address that DSS has on file. Well, there's a whole group of victims of domestic violence whose addresses, they have address proxies in DSS, and therefore they aren't the correct address. And when the client calls the call center rep, they're told, oh no, we don't have any record of you. And so, we can't let you participate in this program. You have an incorrect address. And how do we address that? Or, limitations on how long clients in crisis have their needs met through other, dockets. Clients who are in crisis need assistance now, today. We have clients with shut-off notices, with children who are either on oxygen machines or who are paraplegics. They can't wait until someone makes a decision 2 and 3 days down the road, or we file interrogatories to make a final decision on how this should be handled. So the variety of voices need to be at the beginning of a docket to represent diverse client experiences. In terms of, we are very grateful for the stakeholder compensation program. I work for a small nonprofit called the Center for Children's Advocacy. Our mission is not energy. Our mission is to serve the needs of the most vulnerable children in the child protection system, children who are homeless, children who face discrimination, and children who are medically complex, which is how I got involved in the PURA process, and what regulations exist to protect these very medically fragile children. And so we started that process, but and for so many of our families, the bottom line is, how do we keep on our lights and our heat? It's very basic, but that is not just, but there's so many factors that are involved, and so many dockets that are involved in that decision-making process. So we have been involved in some very limited ones because we are a very small program. We also have to respond to other grants and other needs in the community. But so many of the dockets are vital, intertwined with the issues that our clients face. And so having the stakeholder compensation program allows us to do that. And a program that contemplates reasonable attorney's fees is critical, so that all of the costs that are involved with representation, are part of that reimbursement process. So I think that sums it up. In a limited basis, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I was just going to ask that, Bonnie, if you'd be willing to take some questions.
Of course.
Does anyone have questions, especially if it's someone who maybe has not had experience with the program? If there's anything you'd like to ask of Bonnie?
And I think I want to share that the process and the forms do look a little daunting, perhaps, in terms of, you have to prove substantial contribution. I think our voice informs Pura. Even if they choose to disagree with, something that we are putting forth, I think that having that voice in the room, part of the larger decision-making process, is really critical, and that people should not be shy. People should also not be reticent, to, if it's difficult to figure out how to participate, to really truly, communicate around how you do that. How can I be involved? You do not have to be an attorney. And again, I cannot stress how important community voices are in this process, because that's who it affects. And again, I am hearing from the clients who are the most vulnerable, who are so much at risk. But it is, there are lots of voices, and these voices that I represent are just really critical and an important part of Pura's mission, no matter what the docket, no matter what the title.
Thanks, Bonnie. Tayana, go ahead, please. Sorry, Lauren.
This is Tanea. Just to piggyback off of what Bonnie said a little bit, just thank you for creating this program. It is really crucial for groups like us who have like always been engaged in mutual aid and trying to assist and redirect resources to marginalized communities. And that's always like stopping an eviction, helping with the reconnection fee when the utilities disconnect. And being part of this process is still happening. So I really appreciate lifting up. It's important that we are doing this and still feeling heard. Because a lot of these processes that happen, like when community feedback is asked, it's not like applied. So, I'm just hoping that it is, and it still feels like a little inequitable. Like, I feel like you do need to have a lawyer. On our team, we have like a doctor and a lawyer and like a consultant. And that just, I feel like it kind of takes away from groups that are on the ground still dealing with issues directly, dealing with utility shutoffs, reconnection, disconnection, and like eviction. So just lifting that up, and maybe I know Pura is a quasi judicial organization, but talking to other funders about how to make these processes truly more equitable, if we want to call this equity, because it's not equity. It's equality at best.
Appreciate you sharing that, Tanea. Roslyn, please.
Hello. Yes, I also want to say thank you, for having this program. We are a participant in the stakeholder compensation for this docket. And so it has been a great way for us to be able to participate as a small business while not having to have the financial burden purely for participating. I do want to echo almost everything that Tanea said, while also from the perspective of trying to represent small businesses as a small business. Granted, we are a small business that is purely a nonprofit consultant. So everyone on staff is very aware of nonprofit reporting requirements. We're very comfortable in that space, but other small businesses in trying to apply to stakeholder compensation, and we've also talked to the small business community about this, that this is completely unbelievably foreign, right? The submitting a budget that is publicly available is something that small businesses are uncomfortable doing and have not ever had to do with something before. It is also understanding and dissecting what significant contribution means, and then also just acknowledging that, again, in a small business context, that costs aren't exactly aligned with the way that they need to be reported. As a great example, right? Not everyone's, having to report staff salaries publicly is just something that might or might not be possible for a small business. They might not have everyone on payroll. Payroll changes rapidly, right? Even in the course of this process for us, one person received a raise. So I have no idea how I'm even going to report that in our end of docket report, right? So half of his time that was on this docket is one rate, and then half of his time is another rate. So just highlighting that the reporting burden, although I understand it, it does mean that certain communities really are never going to be able to participate. So although the process is trying to create equity, there's mostly equality in that, as Tanea said, and that it's transparent but not accessible.
Can I chime in and answer maybe like the easiest part of that, which is that for someone who has changed salaries midway, I think you would just use a separate line on the expenditures template, right? So one line you have one rate, one line you have the other rate, and then provide the explanation for it along with that. So I think that one's very easy to fix. I would like just if you could, because I think I know what you're getting at, but I would like a little bit more to hear from you instead of guessing, right? About what you're meaning with the difference between equality and equity, because I think it's important to say that out loud. So I would invite a little bit more discussion of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we will be also submitting a full report we've had multiple interviews, focus groups, and another survey that I think had over 70 or close to 70 participants within the small business community. So we will also, don't worry, be submitting all of this very soon into the docket. But many of the things that came up in our conversations with other small business leaders who would have been interested in participating is that the specifically around the reporting requirements made it very difficult to engage, right? And also very confusing. So a great example in the small business community, I'll just come off on the small business community, building a budget, although it seems like this is a really simple and easy thing to do, and everyone has their organizational budgets. And again, nonprofits often have to do this because we have to submit grants and all of these things that small businesses, on the other hand, have just a different way that they approach budgeting. And so, again, there might be some people that are on payroll. There might be some people that are 1099 contractors. There might be some people that are engaged in different ways and having to be super transparent about all of that. Also, for some small businesses, does create a little bit of pause because there's concern, oh, well, what if someone else sees that information about my business? How will that then be taken or read? And is that something everybody wants to share in that particular moment in the life of their business, right? We are used to it because we're a transparent bunch, but even something as simple as letting someone know as a CEO what my salary is not something that I ever have to do as a small business. And one of the reasons I chose to be an LLC instead of a nonprofit was that I didn't have all of these reporting requirements. So that's one component of how I say, yes, it's equal and that everybody has to do all of the same things. But then what that does lead to is it's easier for and I don't want to say easy, but it's a little easier for a nonprofit to engage versus a small business.
And I don't want to take up time with me speaking, but I just want to sort of make a note of it by saying it out loud that I think maybe one of the solutions is that we need to make a better PR campaign for a motion for a protective order, because in all of our dockets, there is the option. And I think, you know, again, it's maybe a challenging thing to walk someone through, but there is always an option to file something confidentially and file a motion for a protective order. And so if there's and utilities do this all the time, they don't want to disclose the salaries that they pay to their employees because it could hurt them in future hiring, and the same thing with vendors. So there is that option in all of our dockets. And so, you know, we would have to balance it and certainly make sure that total amounts are shown of payments, even if hourly amounts are stricken or redacted. But I think that's something to keep in mind for the future, that we need to make motion protective order clearer and more understandable for people to use.
Jameson, I think you have your hand up.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to take a time to, first, I just want to acknowledge everything that was just said in terms of, you know, being spoken that I 100% agree with. I do want to shift a little bit and talk about the substantial contribution, if that's okay. I know there was a little space to talk about that. And so, you know, the current kind of ambiguity that was talked about for the substantial contribution surrounding the definition and the application of the term substantial contribution imposes, you know, a significant barrier to effective and equitable stakeholder participation. You know, I'm a firm believer that without clear criteria or assurance of reimbursement, the professionals often are must observe the significant financial risk, right? The current structure of the stakeholder compensation unintentionally penalizes the very individuals and organizations that the program is meant to support. And without a well-defined, transparent standard for substantial contribution and without timely disbursement of approved funds, many of these skilled professionals are under-resourced, that are assisting under-resourced groups are disincentivized from participating, right? As we talked about a little bit earlier. There's no clear standard or guidance as to like what constitutes a qualifying contribution. No established metrics by which their efforts will be judged, and no assurance that their time and expertise will be compensated, even if their input proves valuable to the proceeding. And I do also want to take this time to acknowledge that we're not specifically, or I'm not specifically talking about, you know, the current team. I'm just talking about, you know, in the future, right? I personally think the current team up here is really well. I have a great relationship with Danielle and Julia and all the others, you know, who have attended the meetings and have answered questions when needed during the meetings and things of that nature, right? So, you know, the uncertainty, you know, serves as really a disincentive to participate by those who, you know, are qualified to support these grassroots organizations that need the support in order to really understand how to, you know, participate in this quasi-judicial system. And so just to kind of finish up in terms of, you know, where does this compensation, you know, lack of definition of things fall in terms of, you know, equity versus equality? I think uniform expectations without accounting for disparities is one, right? So the program applies to like a single standard, right? To all participants, regardless of their size, financial capacity, or even access to like the technical legal support, right? So this treats all the groups as the same from the start, as if they're starting from the same place, right? That's equity, right? Or sorry, equality, not equity, right? Lack of upfront support or risk mitigation. So participants must really absorb the financial risk and the upfront costs without a guarantee of reimbursement. You know, well-funded organizations can take on this risk. You know, small business organizations like myself, righting wrongs, you know, often under-resourced community-based groups, you know, like myself, we cannot take on this risk. So this leaves a pretty disproportionate burden, right? The ambiguity favors, you know, honestly, the privileged, right? The vague criteria of substantial contribution leaves room for subjective judgment, which, you know, historically often tends to benefit participants with more influence or familiarity with peers' internal process. Again, you know, I just want to acknowledge that we want to create something that can live past the current administration, right? I'm a firm believer of what Commissioner Gillette has done and is continue doing, but you know, everybody can't be there forever, you know. Delays disproportionately harm the most valuable as well. So, without timely disbursement of funds, smaller organizations that rely on consistent funding streams are left in pretty precarious positions. Equity would require timely or even advanced disbursements based on, the need or the capacity of an organization. So those are just a few things that I wanted to highlight and uplift. So thank you for the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Jameson. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Seth.
Sorry, Lauren, to interrupt. I just wanted to follow up on Jameson's very well articulated points with a couple of clarifying questions. I really appreciate hearing the perspectives that we've heard the past couple of minutes in particular, because having had the benefit of being on this side of the fence when we were writing the program rules, I think we struggled with defining significant contribution and thought, some of the ambiguity could be beneficial because we didn't want to create like a prescriptive list. So it's interesting to hear how something that had, you had a positive intention for trying not to limit actually is working to the opposite. So I guess what I'd love to hear more from, in comments, or not to put you on the spot today, on that point. And then the other point you made about timely disbursement, I think in the spirit of making the program something that can outlive everyone on the call today, I'd love to be able to try to tackle changes to those two things, like how do we preserve the intent of not wanting to make a prescriptive list of what constitutes a significant contribution while also achieving the certainty that folks need? Is it providing examples of what has been found to be a significant contribution? Like I'm kind of brainstorming while I was hearing you talk. So I'd love folks to weigh in now or in comments about how we could better address that barrier. And then around the timely disbursement, and recognizing your other very good point in the speakers before you who talked about not everyone starting at the same, certainly just even brainstorming here, maybe it means first-time participants are eligible for some kind of percentage up front. So, I think there are ways, as you heard Lauren and Tanya talk about at the beginning of this presentation, there are things that are not within Pura's immediate control that we'd have to go to the legislature for. And then there are some things that we could evolve the program within our control. Maybe we tinker with the advanced funding option that is available in the program. So for everyone, for Jameson, for Rosalind and others who went before you, the very good points that you're making today, I love your ideas about how Pura could kind of address those.
No, for sure. Thank you. Really quickly give you a quick answer. What I will say is we are drafting up a document to submit. So you'll get like a list of I guess, recommendations and suggestions that we feel would answer your question specifically. Just to give, I guess, a couple. For example, we talked about establishing like a two-tier payment structure. So like 50% of the approved compensation amount should be dispersed at the outset of the docket upon approval of the stakeholders' compensation or participation plan. And then the remaining 50% should be dispersed after 6 months of demonstrated engagement or upon completion of the docket, whichever comes first. And then we talked about, require and reward consistent engagement. So like stakeholders should be expected to, respond to written comments, participate in the majority of the docket related meetings, technical sessions, the hearings, submit a proposed engagement and contribution plan at the outset. So like those kind of basic requirements that, reward the consistent engagement by, either, payment or whatever the case may be. So to just give like a quick example, NAG is participating in a number of peer dockets, just because they're an organization that truly understands that their voice is extremely important to the conversation. And so the leadership team, including Tanea as the executive director and founder of NAG, Um, you know, we're ending dockets and beginning other ones. And there hasn't been like obviously any payment towards anybody for the docket that's ending. And so what happens is that you end up going into multiple dockets without any payment, not even necessarily knowing if you will get paid, because even though you feel like your contribution is substantial, that is honestly 100% up to your office to decide that. Um, and there's just not any transparent language to say exactly what we could potentially do to assure that even though we may be on docket 2 or 3, that the docket 1 or 2 is going to be paid out so we can move forward, right? Or even if it's something like our participation in this docket is completed, even though the docket itself is not completed, there's not really much left for us to do on our end, right? And so maybe the payment can happen immediately when we submit our report. And so we can then take our focus to be on the remaining dockets and not have to worry about the previous docket anymore, right? So then we can be good participants in the current docket in which we're doing. So those are just a few like top of my head examples, but just know that my leadership team and I are definitely working on the docket. It's going to be a portion in our final docket for the overall ease of report, but there would 100% be a section that talks about the substantial contribution and ways that we feel suggestions and recommendations that we feel could help improve that. I do want to finish just by saying that I don't want to overlook what you said, which is, your team got together and you guys really worked on trying to implement something that was genuine in its character in terms of wanting to be as impactful positively as possible to bring in folks. But now hearing and realizing that potentially it may not have happened, for you to acknowledge that and for you to address that and for you to take the time to, one, be on this call, hear it personally, but then potentially go back to your team and have a discussion further and even bring in potential partners to help that conversation. I have to applaud that, to be quite frank, because that's not happening on a number of levels, especially at the federal and the state level. So it's a bit of a fresh air to hear that, we tried something and we thought it might work out and it may have worked out, but not the whole way that we wanted to. And so we're willing to, go back to a drawing board and find something that is more equitable. I just do want to take time to acknowledge that. So thank you for your leadership.
Thanks for those thoughts, Jameson. Those were wonderful. And agree, sometimes we put things on paper, we have this really great intent, and sometimes it doesn't work out exactly as planned, especially with a new program. So really appreciate that. We'll go Bonnie, Mark, and then Kathy.
Thank you. I just want to go back very quickly to what's been said about stakeholder compensation. Stakeholder compensation is not a new program. It exists nationally, and there are standards nationally for what that compensation is all about and how that is developed. It is not based on someone's hourly wage. And to have to, and like one of the earlier speakers said, submitting salaries or pay increases or the issue should be the value of what we are contributing to the process. That cost of what that is something that a global cost that the agency should determine based on a variety of factors. Not what, people who work for nonprofits or even small for-profits, our salaries are nothing compared to what the utility company representatives or executives get. And in a way, it really feels like our participation is devalued by having a very limited compensation. So I would urge the authority to look at alternatives. It enhances the outcome for all ratepayers if we are able to participate and that our participation is valued for the quality of it. Similarly, no one asks the other utility company stakeholders whether or not, what their hourly rate is, what their salary is, and whether what they get reimbursed is appropriate. And so I think that the whole system needs to be evaluated, and that will also address some of the other issues that some of the other people have talked about in terms of, how you fund this, how you support this, how you get involved in diverse dockets. If you have a sense within your organization of what the personnel cost, the administrative cost is, the support system cost, then you can have meaningful participation as opposed to having to pick and choose and frankly being uncomfortable about submitting very sensitive information, even if it is in a secured fashion. It's just protective orders are not the issue. The issue is really respect for the people who are in front of the authority and the value of their service to the process, which is to all ratepayers.
Thank you, Bonnie. Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you. And I agree with all that's been said before. I think that it's all very important. I wanted to emphasize and expand on some of the things that Jameson has said and to add some additional. So with regard to the evidence of substantial contribution, the way I would design a program like that and on the compensation is to get the proposals from the applicants and to agree that if they do what they say they're going to do, then they will be reimbursed. Um, and that you need to decide whether the amount requested is appropriate. If you have questions about it, then you can ask for justification on that kind of. But I think that the negotiation needs to start at the beginning. And speaking of the beginning, I think that it's really difficult. So, as you know, many of these dockets go for years. Most of them, from what I can see, are close to a year in length, and some. So if you don't apply in the first, some of the dockets start before their official dates, 3 months before, 6 months before. The 250501 began in January or February of this year. And so we're supposed to know that they're going to start early. And we have to apply within 2 weeks of when they actually start, even though they're supposed to start months later. And then if we miss that, if we found out in March that they had already started, then it's too late for us to be involved in that. Similarly, if some of the dockets are going on for years and we have something to say about those, we can't join because we can't join because we need the stakeholder compensation fund. First of all, I want to say the stakeholder compensation fund is wonderful. It's a wonderful tool. It enables us to provide the support to the nonprofit accountability group so that they can be involved at some level. We provide workshops for them to tell them how the programs are supposed to work and to get from them how they actually work for them, for the people who are low income, the people who need the programs the most, the people who are affected by the programs. And then to translate that back into legalese and into the process, the judicial process that you have, and to try to do all of that on the same scale. So, when we enter into a docket, we haven't done that. We're not ready to contribute on the first day. We've got to, educate and meet with the community and get the input from that. So the issues are when the stakeholder compensation, when we're allowed to apply for the stakeholder compensation, and also, as Jameson said, when we can be paid. Do we have to wait 2 years, 3 years to be paid for the stakeholder compensation if something goes on for multiple years? That just that's untenable. We can't possibly participate on something like that. So those are some of the things that we again will be making further recommendations on. But it's something that's limiting our participation now. We want to participate in additional dockets, but we have to end our participation in one docket before we have the capacity to engage in other dockets. Thank you. I'll take any questions if you have. Thank you.
Dr. Mitchell, sorry, I'm a little slow at the unmute there. So on the point about them, first of all, the hearing you say some of those points, which seem very intuitive, especially the January versus the May docket. I'm a bit embarrassed by that, so thank you for pointing that out. On the point about being able to join mid-cycle or mid-docket, if you will, if we were able to accommodate a change that allowed belated or mid-cycle applications into the program, has your organization given any thought to whether they would still be able to demonstrate a substantial contribution coming in mid-cycle? And maybe that's an unfair question because, as we've already discussed, the definition around a substantial contribution is probably not as fleshed out as it could be, but just curious if you've thought through whether there should be any limitations or adjustments made for kind of folks who might enter a docket midstream.
Right. Yeah, I think that again, that the organizations would have some idea of what they can contribute. They would not want to join a docket if they don't think that they have anything to contribute. And so they need to, I would expect them to propose that these are the things, we're going to participate in A, B, C, D, we're going to do. So the examples of the types of things for substantial contribution are very helpful. But not just in the process. You can say, these are the people that we represent, the ratepayers that we represent. This is why we're interested in this. These are the kinds of inputs that we think that we can give, and it's up to and then Pura can decide whether that would be enough of a contribution or whether it might be better to wait for a different docket or that kind of a thing. Obviously, it's more work for you, but I think that I think that it's not going to be that big of a problem to see that in practice, because I think that groups can tell you what they think that they will contribute in addition to the participation and the procedural aspects of the docket.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. I recognize that the groups would probably be best situated. Let me kind of add another layer of complexity to my question and maybe ask folks to noodle on it and everyone's comments maybe reflect on it. So I think part of the struggles in developing a program like this is like you struggle with simplicity versus complexity, and obviously, but here with our dockets, as Lauren and Tanya alluded to, we have contested and uncontested. Contested dockets like our rate case applications and let's just stick with rate case applications right now. PURA has significantly less flexibility as we're governed by, the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act statutes, and part of those statutes, as I understand them, do place limitations on interventions into the docket. And so why I'm raising it here is this may be an area where PURA could make a change to the program that allows midstream people to join the program midstream in an uncontested docket where we have more flexibility, but we would maybe not be able to do that in a contested docket where there are more statutory rules around timelines for engagement. I'm kind of speculating about this on the fly, but the reason I'm posing it is if we were able to do that, it would make the program more complex, and that folks would then have to know what the difference between a contested and uncontested docket is versus the simplicity of having the same rules for every type of docket that PURA has. So I think, now that I've probably confused the issue, what I'd love people to reflect on and give us feedback on later is, like, do we irretrievably complicate the program by having different rules for different types of dockets in an effort to make it more accessible where we can? Or do we just have one set of rules for all dockets to like kind of ease up on confusing folks? And just would love folks to reflect on that and give us any feedback you have. And thank you for your comments, Dr. Mitchell.
Kathy, I think your hand was up next. Please go ahead.
Well, I scribbled notes on all sorts of sides of paper, so please bear with me. I wanted to kind of bring up an example that exemplifies what multiple speakers have brought up just now, and that is the performance-based regulation. I'm just going to call it PBR going in right now. So in that docket, it was one docket, it was uncontested, and then it split into 3 dockets that were far more technical. And so by the time that first initial part of the docket was completed, there really wasn't much more I could contribute toward those other 3. They were just too complex for me to have much to say, and I depended on potentially signing on with other advocates who had lawyers on board. That whole docket launched before we had stakeholder compensation in place and before this ease docket. It'd be great to be able to come back. I know that the PBR is going to be one that it's not going to be one and done. There will be other iterations of it. It'd be nice to be able to come back into that and bring whoever I need with me so that I don't have to depend on lawyers from other organizations, although they're wonderful and I'm greatly appreciative of them. But also, so what Jameson was bringing up about figuring out ways to have compensation happen partially throughout a docket might be better than just waiting to the end. And also with the same PBR docket, it started out as uncontested, but there were multiple there were places within the docket where the companies started to want to turn it into a contested docket, or maybe, so I'm not exactly sure, like, I don't understand that process, but I'm adding a third complexity on top of there. Personally, I think that that the rules should be different for contested and uncontested dockets, and maybe they need to, if it becomes contested, that it needs to start to be a different docket, and that contested part closes. I mean, the uncontested part closes. I don't know if that's the right solution, but just adding to the questions. And I also really like Dr. Mitchell's idea that maybe somebody at Pura can help route things to other dockets if people are raising something that they want to address in one docket that might belong better in a different docket. It'd be really great to get that advice up front. Yeah, I guess that was it. I just wanted to bring up the example and to thank you and to thank everybody else that's already spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Arveles?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to echo a couple things that both previous speakers had said and put my own twist on it. So for the average person, it is a little difficult joining these dockets, trying to figure everything out. And while this stakeholder compensation fund has been amazing in educating people, there's still so many people out in the community that want to get involved, and we have the capacity to gather them into, like, nonprofit accountability group has been great in education, but I mean, these funds are limited, so we still have to make it easier to join, but also closing in an uncontested docket and resolving that issue to move on to a new issue and portability for issues when it comes to dockets would be great, because we're able to resolve some problems and move on to others, and possibly even considering, you know, if it does become an uncontested docket, allowing people to sign up, new people to sign up as well, or weigh in. There's still some limitations when it comes to being able to join these dockets, especially for anyone who's learning disabled, dyslexic, and other things like that. So making it easier for them would definitely, you know, help Pura get a new set of voices in the room.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is, you know, do you have some thoughts on how, who is missing from the eligibility criteria, or is there some other groups that should be included that aren't in the program, and how, given there are limited funds, given these are ratepayer funds, and the intent is to try and make sure that it, you know, there's effective use for those funds, how can we expand access to a broader group while maintaining that rigor too?
I would have to defer to Tanea, because Tanea has so far made this, the outreach has been amazing. Even to English language learners, there's been translation services. I would have to defer to Tanea of Nonprofit Accountability Group, because they've done so much outreach already. I'm amazed. And while we can get more people in the room, I really do believe they should be consulted on how to get more people in the room, because I've been impressed with their work so far.
Right, and that even though we do provide translation services, we found out in the beginning that we under budgeted for it, but luckily had a contact that was able to do it at what we budgeted. But you know, the professional organization that I reached out to, they wanted, you know, it would have been over $10,000. So I feel like non-English speakers, you know, they need a way to apply and be able to be a part of the process as well, especially with immigrant communities and the current political climate. They have to pay their bills too and have utilities.
Thank you for that.
And also, I really like the fact that they did break everything down during the class. And so far, I myself am learning disabled, and you know, just the way that everyone in the class has broken everything down, from Attorney Jennings to Dr. Mitchell, it's been great. I haven't had any problems with my own dyslexia. They've been able to go over the diagrams, and they've made it very accessible. But for those who didn't go through decoding in school and the whole process, it would be great if there were more funds allocated to the resources that they have currently been providing.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Cynthia, and then Bonnie.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me? I better ask early. All right, thank you. First, I want to thank Commissioner Gillette for making it possible to have so many people included in the docket, because I think, first of all, in order for us to make substantial contributions, we have to have access to get people into the process and maybe make sure that they are able and able to participate. I want to tell you that Tanea Taylor and Dr. Mitchell and so many other people, Evilise, all people that are working in this process, look at it as a substantial contribution, number one, to make sure that people understand how many different programs are available to assist them in paying their bills, because that's the ultimate goal, is to make sure that everybody is able to share the burden and pay the bills that have to be paid in order for us to move forward. But it also helps that that we have information for people that also indicate that if you are not part of the docket, if you are not providing testimony or input into the process, then your voice is not being heard. So prior to this entire process, so many people were left out that it was, I consider it a substantial contribution to bring so many people into the process, to provide them with the information about the programs, and to do what Tanea's group does so well, and that is make sure that people are aware of what Pura is, aware of the Office of OCC is doing, making sure that they know exactly what it is, where they need to go for assistance, that we've established contacts and connections and had presentations with people from the state, from Eversource, from Operation Fuel, from so many other organizations that actually come in and present to the people and allow them to have their questions answered. I think that it's making it much easier and part of the general process to involve people and let people know what it is that's out there for them and their friends and families that are suffering in Connecticut.
Thank you, Cynthia. Bonnie.
Thank you. I just want to really quickly address what Commissioner Gillette was talking about in terms of the complexity of the dockets. The dockets are very complex. The people who I think are in this session today are not full-time energy. Their organizations are not devoted full-time to energy practice. The people that are traditionally around the table are. It's the utility companies who have armies of lawyers and regulatory staff. There are multiple state agencies who do this work. So the question becomes, how can stakeholders who should have a very important voice in all these conversations effectively and also realistically participate? And I think that's the challenge. Perhaps if there was a way to bifurcate some of these proceedings, so that there are sections of them where, what is relevant to our client constituents or our community issues be reserved for that because, again, we don't have weeks and weeks to devote to these hearings, although the voices of the community are really critical in terms of the decision-making process. Again, I am realistic in understanding that this creates other complexities, but I think making the process, making participation, and I don't want to call it onerous because it's a very important process that Pura is going through on behalf of the entire state. But the reality is that we are not full-time energy regulatory people. And so how do we effectively walk through that door on a continuing basis and have voices heard? I think if someone, wanted to fund all our organizations for 3 years at, a price tag of millions of dollars, we could contemplate hiring staff, but beyond that, figuring out a way for us to effectively and continually and realistically be part of the process.
Thank you, Bonnie. I might be wrong, but quite a few people we heard from have, I think, participated in the program. Has anyone not participated in the stakeholder group compensation program and are open to sharing why? Did some of these things resonate, some of the challenges that have been expressed already? Okay. Is there any additional comments? Hearing a lot of similar comments, agreement. Kathy, go ahead.
I almost didn't participate, but I did. I got in there, but it was really only thanks to multiple Pure staff, including Elizabeth, who helped me figure out how to actually get into the docket. So uploading onto the site, one of the things about the stakeholder compensation is that you actually have to go into 2 different dockets. And that was very confusing. And at some point, I actually submitted something that was like what Pura does to initiate a docket. I don't know how I managed to do that. But I think for people that don't have guidance, I know, like when I went back and read the instructions carefully, they made sense, but I didn't know the difference between some of the words, like what is a comment versus a motion versus, like things that everybody just sort of takes for granted. It took me days and like literally days. It took my whole team days to get to actually submit correctly. And it took your staff a lot of time too, because they had to sometimes walk me through each step on the phone. And I'm very grateful for that, but that's what other people are going to be facing every time.
Thank you for that. And understood. Sometimes we assume those terms are well understood and clear, but that's certainly not always the case, especially for those who aren't working in this space, as Bonnie mentioned, on a regular basis. So we can appreciate that.
Maybe we could ask too, if there's anyone who's on that has not participated, but your interest might be piqued as a result of this conversation, and that you would be curious to learn more. Because again, obviously there's discussion about that staff has been very helpful to help people navigate the process. We've talked a lot about potential improvements, but want to make sure that if any of you are interested, that you have the support you need and know how to get help later if you need it. So if you are someone that fits that description and would like to just self-identify and say, yeah, I'm interested, I'd like to learn more, we can help make sure that that happens as well. Or if you, of course, have questions here today. So we'll leave that hanging while Cynthia Jennings shares with us some more.
Okay, thank you. I think that it's been a real challenge in terms of training people in just the process of the docket, how it works. It's a very legal system, and people really, initially went through a lot of trauma trying to learn exactly what a docket is, how to enter, enter your comments into a docket, where to sign, where to sign in, how to sign into a meeting. I mean, all of those things are a challenge for people, but those are the things that we've done throughout the process in terms of hundreds of multiple choice questions, true, false questions, lots of interaction back and forth with people, trying to take, looking at people who might want to consecutively move into the next docket because now they have the basic understanding of the system. So it's almost training an entire team of people to understand the entire process and how to input into the process. It's not something you can do in just one docket. So, I mean, when people are talking about how difficult it is, yes, it was difficult for us to try and get an understanding of the process so that we could teach it and train people and conduct workshops that were beneficial. But by making it clear that we care about them, I think Taneo made it clear, she would follow up with people. If they had questions, we're always available to be there for them. And that we would take the entire docket apart and put it out there in bites that they could understand and get involved and engaged in a lot of discussion with the entire group on some of the programs and what some of the things are, what some of the definitions are. But it was a challenge initially. After the second or third docket, we've got it down to a science where we know where people come in, if they're coming in at the beginning, or if people are there in the middle or the end, there maybe it's a second or third or fourth docket, then we know what they know because we assess what they know and we make sure that they know the basic terminology. But I think it's important that we do provide the language support and ongoing throughout the entire docket as part of the regular process. Everyone should have the same level of education when they go into the process, and it's been working. So
it's a great point. You're really demonstrating how a lot of this outside work is being done and bringing in others to contribute to the process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, and I again commend the Nonprofit Accountability Group and all of the work that that they've been doing and pulling this together. And something like this also needs to happen in the UI territory, in New Haven and Bridgeport and others. And so what it requires is that the groups that are out there have lots of things on their plate, and utilities is a very daunting. It requires so much technical knowledge and time. Again, the Stakeholder Compensation Group Fund is very helpful, but we've got to match up the people with the technical expertise with those with the legal expertise, with the groups in the communities that are most impacted, and get them all to have enough trust in each other to be able to be willing to invest this much time and effort into creating a body of people. And again, having a one-time intervention is very limited. The more people are involved, the better they can contribute. I think. And so I think that that's at least my goal. I don't know if Tanea is going to get tired of it, but but that's my goal. Is that nonprofit accountability group be one of the major contributors to bring voice to low-income people and urban residents around the programs that are involved and making sure that they're accessible. Thank you.
Thank you. Tania.
And just lastly, just to uplift, like the process has like built relationships around more energy advocates, like having Operation Fuel come in, having Eversource come in, knowing more familiar with the programs by having that like interpersonal relationship built in with people who actually work at Eversource. If we can't necessarily, contact someone through like the hotline or, finding out about the energy programs that exist, I think it's really beneficial for the community to know that these are actual people behind the companies that are involved in the stakeholder compensation process. It's really important.
Quanichi? Apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly.
Thank you. It's Quanisha.
Great.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Quanisha Flippin. And I work with NAG and I'm also involved with the Pure workshop. So I just wanted to reiterate how important it is. And I thank everyone for sharing a lot of great points already because a lot of points that we'd like to lift up have already been made. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the folks. You guys also just also looking at the opportunity to go back and fix things and everything. So I just wanted to reiterate how important it is for these workshops to continue to be funded and make sure that it's adequately funded so we can continue to let the workshops run smoothly. I knew of Pura, but just had little too much knowledge about Pura before I started with the workshop. So I've gained a lot more knowledge as far as even advocating for bills and sharing, or advocating for my bill to be, be able to be paid, pay a fair price that's adequate, where I'm able to actually afford it. So that was a lot of great knowledge I was able to share with some of my friends and family. And then as far as just being able to refer other folks to be involved with the workshops as well. So it's been really great. And I just want to just reiterate how important it is that we need this in our community. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're almost at time, and I do want to respect everyone's time. Maybe what we can do is I'll reshare our slides.
Hot. I'm gonna work.
Sorry, here I'm just getting myself organized across. There we go. Trying to balance multiple screens, not always easy. Okay. So thanks again to Bonnie. Thanks to everyone for sharing your thoughts. It's your experience. It's been really wonderful, and I think going to be extremely helpful as we think through some of the recommendations. To wrap up, again, wanted to remind everyone there are additional resources available on Pura's website. There's also the 101 video training. We've heard about the amazing work that NEG is doing to really help educate and bring more voices into this process. So thank you. What to expect next? We are developing the EASE framework and strategy. So we're going to continue to conduct some additional research to help inform some of the recommendations. We're going to probably continue some additional engagement to test some of those preliminary recommendations. And it was mentioned earlier by Tanya that there's going to be some training and resource development with Pura staff, really helping to elevate their understanding in terms of how to move this forward and continue to make this more equitable and and successful to bring more people into this process. Our final recommendations will be in that strategy, of course, taking into consideration all of the stakeholder input that has been provided as part of this process. It's wonderful to hear that you're going to be filing additional comments, recommendations. We, of course, want to continue and consider the Connecticut context, as well as what's happening in other jurisdictions, but certainly making it a made in Connecticut recommendation. And then, of course, considering the feasibility and relevance, making sure that these can be implemented. Continue to contact us, continue to engage, reach out if you have additional comments. Our information is here. I think you've been engaging with some of us individually too, so you have our contact information as well. Tanya, anything else I'm missing?
Nope, I don't think so. I just want to reiterate, appreciate bringing up that we are still open to some of to small group interviews. So if you are a person or an organization and would like to talk more in depth offline, please use that email address there to reach out to us because we'd love to hear from you. And also noting that the resources were placed in the chat and that the slides and transcript will in fact be posted. So you will have access to the slides after the meeting. That's all for me.
Great. Okay, I think we'll end it there. Or Madam Chair, or Elizabeth, Danielle, any additional comments or last words?
Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, that's all for us. Thanks so much.